So the elemental balancing has been brought to us from the release of Fenware, and there's a lot to talk about when discussing the rainbow element, ranging from its pros and cons when utilizing this element, how to get the rainbow element, what teams you should use for the rainbow element, and lastly, is the rainbow element worth it considering its purpose as Tower Fantasy players? So with that being said, let's get right into it. So with Fenware being added, she is introduced to two resonance, and that is Volt and Balance. She's the first character to be introduced to a dual resonance, which means making more team combinations, such as for example Fenware, Saki, and Lin, and other teams can be built around this. Basically, the possibilities are practically endless. The benefits behind Balance Resonance should be considered a double-edged sword, so to speak, for you see, when you obtain a Rainbow Element team by acquiring 3 separate elemental weapons of different types to your team, you'll notice slight differences to its overall buffs to your teams. For instances, a mono team like Frost, Vault, Flame, and Physical teams are granted with a buff towards their respective elemental attacks by 50% and their elemental resistances by 25%. But for Rainbow, there's only one thing it shows in common amongst its rivaling elements, and that's only the attack buff. Meanwhile, your resistance will remain neutral, which means you're not going to be gaining any resistance at all. However, it's still beneficial since it does leave less stress for incoming players and free-to-plays, since they don't have to wait longer than Initiator, which is a plus side if I say so myself. And it's also a good way to basically just trying to have fun with the elements that you were trying to play with, if you had favorites in any way, form, in particular. So building a team out of 3 different elemental weapons could be looked upon as something to experiment upon, since it is a creative thing that has been introduced. And ultimately, you could build any team to your liking as long as you have 3 different elemental weapons, and you'll gain your rainbow resonance. For instance, Fenware with Saki and Lin, they each have their own separate elements from each other, and since they do, you'll be aligned with the rainbow resonance. If you're looking to make a comp team with the rainbow element, it may be deemed as complex since there are very few characters who can properly fill the roles respectively. The other concern is if using this resonance, some teams will lose value if separated from their respective mono teams. For example, a team that can work properly together is, for example, Alice, Saki, and Tsubasa. But if we removed Saki out of this mono team and placed her in a team like Fenware and Lin together, values will be lost, such as a buff towards your frost attacks to all mono teams, and that would be lost specifically. However, the plus side to this is that when you place Saki into your rotations in the Rainbow Resonance, or just in general, she can still reset skills to your team to keep the versatility going. The problem with this, however, is that Fenware is currently the only character who has to be on your team for the time being for this to work successfully, at least until Icarus makes an appearance into Global, that is, of course. The other problem is that since Fenware is only and currently the Rainbow leading character, you'll be limited to only 2 other slots to make your ideal Rainbow team, which can be looked upon as problematic since this isn't a mono team, which if it was, there would be more ups than downs when making a Volt team with Fenware, since the Volt has a decent enough consistent roster when all things are considered. The last problem others may address is the selfish playstyle that Fenware has. When you look into her kit, nothing explains how she can benefit others on the field, off the field, or even buffs for that matter in general. When you use Fenware, all the healing factors can only be applied if she's on the field and when she does the attacks herself. And her notes can only be applied if she takes the field when she does the damage as well. For her to even obtain those stacks of notes, the first place, you'll need to do a few list of moves to acquire these notes faster are Menacing Hunt, Thick and Fast, and Wolf Bite, which will grant you a 100% chance to receive a note stack maxing out at 5 within the 15-second window, which once you detonate your stacks, from Reverberated, her damage multiplier will increase depending on how many notes you collected at the time, and if you had a decent amount, it would double. But in all honesty, Rainbow has yet to reach its prime since Icarus is not yet into global just yet, and with Femware, she introduced us to the first dual-wielding resonance, which is nice and all, but once Icarus makes an appearance to global, I fear that Femware will get overshadowed by Icarus. Overall, Femware is still a solid character to use for both resonance values for the time being, but I think she shines best in a mono team than that of a balanced resonance team. And with all that being said, there's still a lot of fun where you could use with her as we experiment through Tower Fantasy together. And with all that being said, I think I'm about to wrap up the video here. Tell me what you guys think about Femware in the comments below. Do you feel like she outweighs the cons, or do you feel like the pros happen to be a lot more sufficient than that of the cons? Let me know in the comment section below how you feel about Femware, and most of all, how do you guys feel about the elemental balancing resonance? But with all that being said, this is KeiZaro here, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.
I'm always watching.